A neutral Ukraine, the ultimate game of geopolitical Jenga. The Jenga tower of European security. Neutral but heavily armed, independent but reliant on outsiders. That paradox sits at the heart of Ukraine's most audacious diplomatic gambit in recent memory, a proposal floated in Istanbul that offered neutrality in exchange for NATO-style security guarantees. On the surface, it seemed pragmatic. Kyiv would pledge not to join NATO, thereby respecting Moscow's red line, while securing promises of military protection from a coalition of Western powers. But look closer, and the contradictions pile up like blocks in a game of Jenga. Every promise, concession, and compromise is another wooden piece being slid from the tower. Some moves stabilize the structure, others weaken it, and one wrong pull could bring the whole thing crashing down. The stakes could not be higher. A neutral Ukraine would reshape the European security order that has defined the continent since the Cold War. It would test the credibility of Western alliances, probe Russia's appetite for risk, and set precedents for other conflicts simmering around the globe. The idea has split policymakers. To some, it's a diplomatic masterstroke, a way to break the deadlock of war without forcing Ukraine into NATO. To others, it's smoke and mirrors, a paper shield that risks leaving Ukraine stranded between Moscow's aggression and the West's hesitation. The question is simple but profound. Can neutrality, underwritten by foreign muscle, truly protect a nation that has been the fault line of European wars for centuries? Or is this a balancing act destined to collapse? The proposal in detail: neutrality with teeth. At its core, the Istanbul proposal was straightforward but radical. Ukraine would renounce its bid for NATO membership, an ambition enshrined in its constitution, in return for binding security guarantees from a coalition of powerful states. These guarantors, reportedly including the US, UK, France, Germany, Turkey, Canada, Poland, and even Israel, would pledge to defend Ukraine if it were attacked. The framework mirrored NATO's Article 5, which states that an attack on one ally is an attack on all. But this was not NATO. There would be no Brussels-based command structure, no integrated planning, no joint exercises under a unified doctrine. Instead, the coalition would operate more like a contracted alliance, promises on paper, but dependent on the political will of each guarantor in the moment of crisis. Ukraine, for its part, was clear. Neutrality did not mean weakness. Kyiv insisted it would maintain a powerful standing military, invest in modern weapons, and harden its defenses. Neutrality meant no alliances, not no arms. In theory, this arrangement created a balance. Russia's gain, NATO's expansion eastward, would be halted. Ukraine's gain, a shield of Western pledges without the endless limbo of waiting for NATO membership. The West's gain, a peace framework without the immediate risk of war with Moscow. Yet the details were foggy. Would the guarantees be legally binding, requiring parliamentary approval across multiple capitals? Would Western states agree on automatic military intervention or leave room for interpretation? And crucially, would Russia see this as a real concession or simply NATO under another name? The history of neutrality. Why the word is toxic. Neutrality sounds simple. Stay out of alliances, don't provoke neighbors, avoid entanglements. But for Ukraine, the word carries heavy baggage. The Budapest Memorandum, 1994. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ukraine inherited the world's third largest nuclear arsenal. In 1994, it agreed to give up those weapons in exchange for security assurances from the US, UK, and Russia. The Budapest Memorandum promised respect for Ukraine's sovereignty and borders. 2 decades later, Russia tore up the agreement by annexing Crimea and fueling war in the Donbass. For Ukrainians, security guarantees now sound like empty promises written in disappearing ink. The Minsk Accords, 2014 to 2015. Brokered by Germany and France, the Minsk Accords sought to end fighting in eastern Ukraine. They called for ceasefires, local elections, and autonomy for Donbass regions. Instead, they became a diplomatic graveyard. Ceasefires collapsed, political reforms stalled, and both sides accused each other of bad faith. Minsk taught Ukrainians another bitter lesson. Agreements without enforceable mechanisms are invitations for exploitation. Comparisons with other models. Switzerland has practiced armed neutrality for centuries, backed by geography, wealth, and international recognition. Austria, 1955, adopted neutrality as the price for Soviet withdrawal, embedding it into its constitution. Finland walked the tightrope of Finlandization, avoiding NATO while maintaining enough autonomy to avoid complete Soviet control. But Ukraine is not Switzerland, Austria, or Finland. Its geography makes it a natural buffer between Russia and NATO. Its history is scarred by imperial contests. And unlike neutral states that voluntarily avoided alliances, Ukraine is seeking neutrality as a survival mechanism, backed by foreign guarantees. In other words, this is neutrality, but on Ukraine's terms. Western allies, united in rhetoric, divided in resolve. For the West, the proposal raises a thorny question. Can you promise to defend Ukraine without NATO's institutional machinery? The United States, American support has oscillated between administrations. Some see guarantees as a way to stabilize Eastern Europe without NATO expansion. Others fear they would be unenforceable, a blank check that Congress might not honor in a crisis. Europe's mixed chorus. France. Macron has spoken of post-war security assurances for Ukraine, echoing his broader vision of European strategic autonomy. Germany, hesitant, cautious, weighed down by its energy ties to Russia and reluctance to overextend militarily. Poland and the Baltics, vocal champions of Ukraine, pushing for strong guarantees and arms support. Hungary, often out of step with EU consensus, tilting toward Moscow. Global players, Turkey, keen to balance relations, hosting negotiations while hedging its bets. Israel, an unexpected mention as a guarantor, but its role would likely be symbolic. The Western dilemma is stark. They want to deter Russia but avoid formal obligations that could drag them into direct war. A NATO-lite pact may split the difference, but risks pleasing no one. Russia's perspective, victory or trap? For Moscow, Ukraine's neutrality is both tempting and threatening. On one hand, neutrality fulfills a long-standing Russian demand, halting NATO's eastward march. On paper, it looks like a strategic win. But on the other hand, the proposed guarantees could be worse than NATO. A loose coalition of guarantors, led by Washington, could be unpredictable and harder to manipulate. It could mean U.S. bases, arms, and influence in Ukraine without the bureaucratic checks of NATO. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's dismissal of the idea as a road to nowhere captured this ambivalence. Russia thrives on leverage, frozen conflicts, energy blackmail, and political pressure. A deal that solidifies Ukraine's Western alignment, even without NATO, cuts into that strategy. For the Kremlin, the best outcome is neither full neutrality nor NATO-lite. It is perpetual uncertainty, keeping Ukraine unstable and the West divided. The skeptics, a paper shield? Critics of Ukraine's proposal warn that it risks creating the illusion of protection without the substance. Legal weakness. Unlike NATO, a NATO-lite pact may lack ratified treaties with binding obligations. Operational gaps. No joint command, planning, or exercises. Political will. Would Western parliaments vote to send troops if Russia invaded again? Or would they dither, as they did during Georgia's 2008 war? The biggest vulnerability is gray zone warfare. Russia excels at cyber attacks, disinformation, and covert destabilization, actions that fall below the threshold of open invasion. Would Western guarantors respond to such tactics or shrug them off as not covered? For skeptics, Ukraine risks building a paper shield, strong in symbolism, flimsy in deterrence. Scenarios: building or breaking the Jenga tower. The future of Ukraine's neutrality proposal can be imagined in 3 scenarios, each like a different outcome of a Jenga game. Best case, a stable tower. Ukraine adopts armed neutrality, backed by robust Western guarantees. Russia grudgingly accepts, calculating that another invasion is too costly. Western guarantors, though outside NATO, act decisively if Moscow probes. Ukraine rebuilds, integrates economically with the EU, and stability returns. Middle case, a wobbly tower. The guarantees exist on paper, but lack clarity. Russia tests them with cyber attacks, energy cutoffs, and localized clashes. Western unity cracks. Some respond firmly, others hesitate. The tower doesn't collapse, but it wobbles with every Russian move. Ukraine survives, but remains vulnerable, caught in permanent tension. Worst case, collapse, Russia rejects the deal outright. Western countries hesitate to enforce their pledges. Moscow exploits the ambiguity, escalating pressure, perhaps even launching another offensive. The paper shield disintegrates, and Ukraine is left exposed, a tragic repeat of Budapest 1994. diplomacy on a tightrope. Ukraine's neutrality proposal is not just a diplomatic document. It is an attempt to rebuild the European security order on fragile foundations. Each guarantee, each concession, is a block in a Jenga tower that could either hold steady or collapse spectacularly. Neutral but armed, independent but reliant, secure on paper, vulnerable in practice. That is the paradox Ukraine offers to the world. Whether the tower stands depends not only on Kyiv's determination, but on Western resolve and Moscow's appetite for risk. If the blocks hold, Europe may glimpse a fragile peace. If they fall, the crash will reverberate far beyond Ukraine's borders. The world is watching. The game is on.